There's a liquid sitting in most homes right now, costs almost nothing, and it can strip carbon deposits clean off your engine's internals on a molecular level. Do not reduce them, don't slow them down, remove them. And here's the part that stops people cold. Versions of this method were being used by mechanics and engineers as far back as the early 1960s, before fuel injectors, before computer diagnostics, before the $300 engine flush service your dealership invented. So why doesn't anyone talk about it? That's the question worth asking. And by the end of this video, you're going to know the answer. And you're going to know exactly how to use it yourself. Stay with me, because this one's going to change the way you think about every tune-up bill you've ever paid. Let's start with the problem, because most people don't actually understand what carbon buildup is doing to their engine. Every time your engine burns fuel, combustion leaves behind residue. It's carbon, the same element in charcoal and soot and ash. And over thousands of miles, that carbon doesn't just sit there politely. It builds up on intake valves, on piston heads, inside combustion chambers. It hardens, it insulates, it chokes airflow, it disrupts the spray pattern of your fuel injectors, and the engine compensates, quietly, invisibly. Until one day, you notice the rough idle, the hesitation when you accelerate, the MPG that used to be 32 and is now 26, and you've convinced yourself that's just the car getting older. It's not the car getting older, it's carbon. And here's what makes this fascinating. Your engine was never designed to run indefinitely on modern pump fuel without some kind of intervention. The tolerances inside a modern engine are precise to a fraction of a millimeter. Carbon deposits don't need to be thick to cause problems. A layer thinner than a human hair on the face of an intake valve changes how that valve seals, changes how air enters, changes everything downstream. Most people never connect those dots. Most people just keep paying for tune-ups. Now here's where the story gets interesting. In the decades before catalytic converters and electronic fuel management, mechanics had a very different relationship with engines. They understood them mechanically, intimately, and they were always looking for ways to keep them running clean without expensive teardowns. Some of them, particularly in industrial and agricultural communities, started experimenting with water injection. Not water in the oil, not water in the coolant. Water, controlled, measured, introduced directly into the intake manifold. The idea sounds wrong on the surface. Water and engines don't mix, right? That's what most people think. But what those early mechanics discovered was something that metallurgists and combustion engineers already knew from a completely different field. Superheated steam, under the right conditions, reacts with carbon deposits through a process called the steam-carbon reaction. It breaks carbon down at the molecular level into carbon monoxide and hydrogen, gases that burn off harmlessly in the next combustion cycle. The engine, in a sense, cleans itself. This wasn't fringe science. Steam had been used for decades in industrial settings to clean carbon off equipment that couldn't be disassembled. The mechanics who figured out how to apply a version of this to internal combustion engines weren't doing anything exotic. They were applying known chemistry to a practical problem. And it worked. People who tried it reported smoother idle, better throttle response, sometimes a measurable improvement in fuel economy, particularly on high-mileage engines that had never been cleaned. Now, why does water work when nothing else seems to? This is the part most videos completely miss, so let me break it down clearly. When you introduce a small, controlled amount of water into a hot, running engine, specifically water mist or vapor drawn through the intake, a few things happen simultaneously. First, the water absorbs heat rapidly. This actually drops combustion temperatures slightly, which in high compression or turbocharged engines has a secondary benefit of reducing knock. But that's almost a side effect. The main event happens on the carbon deposits themselves. Carbon that is baked onto metal surfaces at high temperatures is not water-soluble under normal conditions. But inside a running engine, intake temperatures and combustion temperatures are extreme, and at those temperatures, water vapor doesn't behave like water. It behaves like steam, and steam at high temperature is chemically reactive with carbon in a way that room temperature water simply isn't. The steam-carbon reaction breaks the molecular bonds holding that buildup together. What comes off isn't a big chunk of debris that clogs something downstream. It vaporizes. It converts. It exits through your exhaust as combustion gases. The reason this works is surprisingly simple once you understand it. You're not washing the carbon off. You're chemically converting it. That's why this method is fundamentally different from additive products in a bottle. Most fuel additives are detergents. They're trying to dissolve carbon the way soap dissolves grease. Some of them work to a degree, particularly on softer deposits. But dense, baked-on carbon that's been building for 80,000 miles? Detergent doesn't touch that. Steam chemistry does. So why don't mechanics tell you this? Here's where I want to be careful. Because the honest answer is more nuanced than a conspiracy. Part of it is simply economics. A professional carbon cleaning service, whether it's walnut blasting, chemical soak, or an ultrasonic clean, costs money. It takes time. It's a legitimate service with real value for engines that are heavily built up. No shop is going to hand you a free method and lose that revenue stream. But the bigger reason is that the automotive industry, over the past few decades, has moved almost entirely toward proprietary chemical solutions. There are billion-dollar product lines built around engine additives, fuel system cleaners, and flush treatments. When your category is worth that much money, the simple mechanical solutions that predate it tend to get quietly set aside. Not because they don't work, but because there's no margin in them. And there's a third layer, liability. Modern engines are more complex than anything those 1960s mechanics were working on. Direct injection engines, in particular, have very specific vulnerabilities. A shop recommending that customers run water through their intake opens a door to questions they'd rather not answer, even if the method itself, done correctly, poses no real risk. So the knowledge doesn't get passed down. Young mechanics don't learn it, and it fades. Not because it stopped working, but because the system around it changed. Now, let me give you the practical picture, because this is what you actually came here for. The modern application of this principle is called water injection, and it exists in several forms. At the enthusiast level, there are dedicated water methanol injection kits used on performance and turbocharged vehicles, specifically because of that combustion cooling and carbon reduction effect. These are used by serious builders who understand the chemistry. But for everyday carbon cleaning on a standard gasoline engine, the method that some longtime mechanics and restorers still swear by is simpler. A slow, controlled introduction of distilled water, not tap water, distilled, through the intake, while the engine is running warm. The key word is controlled. This is not about pouring water into your engine. It's about introducing a very small, metered amount, a thin stream, almost a mist, drawn in through a vacuum line, or the intake airstream while the engine is running at a fast idle. The engine has to be fully warmed up. The water has to be introduced slowly enough that it vaporizes immediately rather than pooling. Done correctly, you'll often hear the engine note change, a slight roughness as the steam hits the deposits and begins breaking them loose. Some restorers just describe it as a low, laboring sound that gradually smooths out over several minutes. That sound is the cleaning happening in real time. Afterward, many people notice the idle stabilizes, throttle response sharpens, and in some cases, the exhaust clears up noticeably, particularly on vehicles that had been running slightly rich or showing signs of carbon-related misfires. Is it a substitute for a full professional clean on a severely neglected engine? No. But as a maintenance practice, done every 30,000 to 50,000 miles on a relatively healthy engine, it's the kind of thing that keeps those heavy deposits from ever forming in the first place. And it costs almost nothing. Here's the part that should actually make you angry. And I say that as someone who appreciates what good mechanics do. The average intake valve cleaning at a dealership for a direct injection vehicle runs between $300 and $600 in most markets. That service exists because modern direct injection engines have a known carbon buildup problem. Fuel no longer sprays across the intake valve to keep it clean, so deposits accumulate faster than in older port injection designs. Some automakers have known about this design flaw for years. Some have issued technical service bulletins. Very few have offered proactive solutions, because the solution to a problem is worth far less than the recurring service revenue that the problem generates. Meanwhile, the underlying chemistry that could have been part of every driver's basic maintenance knowledge, the steam-carbon reaction that those early engineers understood, sits in a corner of the internet, passed between old-timers and forums, mostly unknown to the tens of millions of people paying those service bills every year. That's the real story here. So here's what I want you to take from this. You now understand what carbon buildup actually is and what it does to performance. You understand why steam chemistry works where detergents fall short. You understand why this knowledge doesn't get handed down in a system built around selling you services instead of empowering you with them. And you have a starting point for a maintenance approach that the industry would much rather you didn't think about. If this video opened your eyes, and I think it did, do one thing for me. Share it with someone who drives an older, high-mileage vehicle. Because for every person watching this, there are 10 more paying for problems they don't need to have. And if you want to go deeper, the next video covers another forgotten method that applies the same principle to fuel injectors. A method so cheap and effective that some professional rebuilders use it before they even crack a cleaning machine. That one is right here, and I promise you won't expect the ingredient.